Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. It's really lovely to be here. Where is everybody joining us from? I'd love to see your comments in the chat box. Where are you watching this from right now? I am currently on the south coast of England. It's very grey and cold here, so I hope it's a lot brighter and warmer and sunnier wherever you guys are. So yeah, let us know where you're joining us from. Just type into the chat box. And I'm joined today by Ed Dudley and Sean Gibson. So Ed, where are you joining us from today?
Hi, Charlotte, Sean. Hi, everybody. I'm joining you from Hungary today. I'm in Budapest, where it's also a little bit grey and cold. And
Hi,
Sean?
Charlotte, Ed, everybody. I'm in North Oxfordshire. It was really, really sunny until about 5 minutes ago. I've just closed all the curtains, and now it's gone quite dark. So I wonder
like
what's happened.
Typical UK weather. And so we've got Matt from Madrid. I can see we've got Lizgardo from Peru, Patricia from Rome, Anna from Poland, Maria from Greece. So I bet it's lovely in Greece right now. Eva from Hungary. Oh, so you've got someone else from Hungary there.
Great.
Wei from Myanmar. Very nice to welcome you today. UK from Mexico. Anna from Portugal. It's really lovely to have you guys with us. Christina from Lithuania, welcome. Oh, this is lovely. So we've got people from a wide reach across the globe. Well, you're all here today because we're going to be talking about oracy skills. I'm not sure how familiar you all are with the term oracy skills. It's something that was quite new to me, and I know to Sean as well. So it's been really lovely sort of learning more about oracy skills over the last few months. And before we dive into today's chat, let's just introduce ourselves. So we can see where you guys are from, and I'm assuming you're all teachers in your respective countries. My name is Charlotte Murphy. I work for Oxford University Press for their professional development team, but I used to be an English language teacher. And actually, when I was teaching, I did a lot with oracy without really realizing it. One particular element of oracy skills focus was when I was teaching in Japan. And I used to start all my lessons with something called mini news, where all my students would spend a few minutes telling the class about what they've done over the weekend or what they've done in the week. And we all had the opportunity to ask questions and learn more about something that the student had shared with us. And a really lovely way to sort of learn things through talking to each other and having a chat. And Sean and Ed, I don't know if you've experienced this with many of your sort of teaching experiences, but a lot of the time in this ELT context, students get this platform to speak, which they might not always get in their mainstream education. And this is certainly the case for the students I had when I was in Japan, who would really focus on reading and writing in their mainstream schooling. But anyway, so it's lovely to be here today. And Ed, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us about your connection to ELT?
Okay. Well, I'm Ed, and I'm from the UK, but I live in Hungary. And I taught high school students in Hungary for many years. And I'm also a freelance trainer, so I do lots of training work for Oxford University Press, and I have written materials as well. And I was also involved in the focus paper that OUP put together about oracy, or oracy if you prefer. So it's something that I'm really interested in talking about. And the one example from my life, I've got two examples, but the first example from my life that I can share with you relates to the kind of skills that I needed to have when I went to have lunch at school in the canteen. And it wasn't just a question of being able to speak Hungarian, because my Hungarian is good, but I realized it was such a tricky task to know how to chat to people, that I didn't really know, and teachers would come and teachers would go, and sometimes I had to talk to people that I'd never spoken to before. And that figuring out of what am I going to say next is one example of how we use oracy skills in everyday life.
Yeah.
So I'm really looking forward to continuing our talk here and seeing what people have to say about their own experiences.
Yeah.
And Sean, how about you?
Hello, everybody. My name's Sean. I work in Oxford University Press. I'm talking from North Oxfordshire today. I've been at Oxford University Press for about 20 years, working on materials, specifically on English File. I've been working on almost since I began here, so on all the levels and editions of that. Before that, I was a teacher for 10 years in Spain, Portugal, Greece, Poland, Ecuador, and also on the south coast, south of England. My most recent contact with Oracy, I think, was towards the beginning of lockdown. I had to deliver a webinar for Oxford University Press and some training materials. And I hadn't done a webinar for a while, and I was unfamiliar with the tools I was using. I was unfamiliar with the platform. And to help me relax, I thought I would tell a little anecdote that was connected to the topic. So I went through the anecdote. I was very animated. I was using my voice. Thought that's gone quite well. I think I've delivered that anecdote really well. I think I've done it, and now I'm ready to move on, full of confidence. And I looked at the chat box for some sort of reinforcement, some feedback, maybe a smiley face or a ha-ha or something like that. And all I could see was 45 different messages saying, "We can't hear you." And obviously what had happened, someone had introduced me. I'd forgotten to turn my microphone on. More unforgivably, I'd forgotten to check if anybody could hear me or not.
Yeah.
And it made me think how things appear so obvious once you've done them. Things about Oracy, checking that people can understand you, checking that your message is getting across. And it's easy to forget that there are times when we don't know that. We do have to learn those. That's one of the things we need to bear in mind when we are speaking to people and performing.
And of course, speaking online, like in a webinar, is exactly the kind of speaking skill which is becoming part and parcel of real everyday life now.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And Manuela says it happens to us all. I mean, it does. And maybe that is one of the number one blockers of being able to express ourselves with oracy skills, is forgetting to turn our mic on.
Yeah. Okay, before we go on, I have another little anecdote I'd like to share with you, which looks at a different aspect of oracy. I mentioned that the idea of figuring out what to say when I'm chatting to people in a foreign language or even in my own language. But there's another really interesting thing that happens when people are using language together. And an example I can give you is if you're like me, you love doing crossword puzzles, because I adore doing crosswords. And sometimes I find that I get stuck on a clue. And so what I do then is I love to turn to the people I'm with, colleagues or friends, and we try to figure out what a clue might be together. And very often something really, really quite magical happens. Through thinking together and suggesting ideas to each other, we help each other figure out what the answer could be. And that's, I think, the kind of situation that we've all experienced. And it's at the heart of when we use oracy in educational circumstances to learn through talk. And we'll be giving some more examples, I think, today about how we can get students thinking and talking and learning together through talk.
I like that, Ed. That's a really nice way of, showing what it means when we work through using oracy skills. So, guys, if you have any questions that you want to ask us today about oracy skills, please pop them in the chat box. We had a few questions that came through ahead of this session, actually. So it'd be really nice to sort of have a look at a few of those now. So to start us off, and this is quite a fitting question, really. Swapan from India asked, how would you define Oracy skills, and what are the sub-skills required to acquire and hone Oracy skills? What do we think?
I can give a little answer to that, and then Sean, if you want to add anything. I would say that basically the shortest answer is that Oracy involves using spoken language well, both as a speaker and as a listener, when you're in some situation where you need to do both at the same time. And if we're speaking as educators, then Oracy involves using spoken language at one level to learn the basics of communication. But when we go a bit further, it can also be used as a learning tool, and that's something we're going to be showing some examples of. Sean, I don't know whether this is something that informs your feelings about teaching, writing, producing materials for the classroom, whether you have any other ideas about what Oracy is from a coursebook point of view.
I think it does. I think, as Charlotte said at the beginning, it's, as a term, it's actually something that's quite new to me. But having worked on English file for as long as I have, one of our starting points with the authors was this issue of why it was so difficult to get students to talk. We knew they'd come to learn English. They knew how important it was. They were generally enthusiastic, chatty people full of ideas. And for some reason, when we put the speaking exercise in front of them, that's the one thing stopped. So we spent a lot of time really looking at it from a perspective of experience, rather than looking at it particularly from an academic point of view. Just trying to work out what it was that was going wrong about these speaking activities. And what I really like about the Oracy framework is it does give you a lens to look at all the different things that are happening. And that typically when a class doesn't respond to a speaking activity,
which happens a lot.
It does happen a lot. There isn't one answer. It's not because as a class they don't want to do it, or because the class their language isn't at a high enough level. I think that you have got all of those different things going on in different students, which together results in potentially a negative cycle where everybody's feeding off reasons other people haven't got. I'm not speaking because I'm a bit anxious. I'm a bit worried about my pronunciation. I don't know if I've got anything to say. I think all of that can become, well, we'll wait for the teacher to say something. So I think on English file, we were always very conscious to look at that, to try and remove as many obstacles as we could, rather than just looking at one way to, try and make things more motivating. That's great. What about reducing the anxiety and making sure that language support is there and that there's a chance to build enough confidence to do this.
Great.
Yeah, and that sort of touches on quite a few questions that came through. One in particular from Efrain in Mexico. He asked, how could I encourage my students to talk? And as you rightly say, Sean, there are many obstacles which can sort of put up a barrier or create these effective filters that make it challenging for our learners to express themselves orally. I think thinking about what motivates them to speak, what they're comfortable talking about, it's always good to stretch our students' comfort zones, but you don't want to completely plunge them out of their comfort zone, because then they will sit back and, like you say, Sean, just wait for the teacher to talk and leave it to the teacher and try and say the bare minimum. At least this is what I've experienced as a teacher.
It's really interesting that most students have extremely good reasons not to say anything in class. They know, for example, that teachers are usually more than happy to speak the whole lesson long. They're also aware that whenever they do say something, very often bad things result in that. And so a smart student is arguably one who keeps her mouth or his mouth closed in class. So I think what we have here is an underlying culture that needs to be addressed of what the role is of speaking in the classroom. And a very good way of helping students to value oracy is to change the culture of our classrooms in such a way that there's more talk, and that the talk is associated with work and with thinking, and that it isn't always something which is a performance. In other words, we aren't always looking to correct or evaluate what our students say, but rather we're trying to set up situations where students are working together in groups to learn through talk. And very good things can come from that, which we can get onto in just a moment. But I do think it's important to address the fact that if you're watching this now and you're thinking, how can I get my students to be more motivated to speak? I think a very good question to ask yourself is, why do you think they're not so motivated right now? What's happening in the class normally that's giving them reasons to stay quiet? And those, I think, are the things to address before you go any further. And I speak from bitter experience there. I've had the same problems with reticent students that Sean's been talking about.
Yeah, definitely. And I've been talking a lot about learner training recently, with many teachers doing the move to online tuition, and there is a degree of learner training that's needed to help, engage the students in the online lessons. But I think there's also a degree of teacher training as well, isn't there? And, the teacher understanding when they need to stop talking and really sort of pass over those times to the student to be able to take hold of that mic and express themselves.
Definitely. I should point out here that I imagine that most people joining us are English language teachers, but Oracy work actually began with the general classroom. So it's something that was designed for history lessons, for social science classes, for maths lessons even. But of course, it applies itself easily to the language classroom, the foreign language classroom, because we are interested in getting our students to speak as language teachers. But as we get into the topic, we'll see that there is an awful more to Oracy than just combining listening and speaking skills. It's a lot more interesting than that. And we're all doing it now as well, by the way. There's so much going on in our heads when we're involved in a conversation like this. So it's a really interesting topic to think about and to talk about and to find out more about as well, whether you're a teacher of English or maths or a student, whatever you might be.
And I can see there's a question that's come through from Vera. She's asked, what would you recommend to read on the topic? I found lots of stuff online when I was sort of learning more about oracy skills, but one thing I'd really recommend is the paper that you wrote, Ed, the focus paper. That's it's free to access through Oxford University Press. If you just go to the link below, and Ed, you wrote a really fantastic focus paper on oracy skills. What I really liked about it was a very clear overview of what we mean by oracy skills, but it provided those really nice practical aspects of how you can include oracy skill practice in your lessons.
Well, thank you. I will say to everyone that the Oracy focus paper does try to save you from doing all the reading yourself. But to get back to Vera's question, if there is anybody that you'd like to read, any author, then it's definitely Neil Mercer, M-E-R-C-E-R. Neil Mercer, who is the definitive expert on oracy in education. And he's written many books about this and is part of the Cambridge Oracy program. His book, Words and Minds, is a great place to start if you're interested in this idea of how language is used to think together. But getting back to the focus paper, one of the things that I tried to do there was to bear in mind that the teachers perhaps want to dip into this topic and come back to it. So I made sure that there were plenty of activities to think about, but also links and ideas for further resources and things to try out.
Thanks, Ed. There's a few lovely comments that have come through on Facebook that I just want to share with everyone. We had one comment from Manuela. I think it was more sort of her experiences than a question, but she talks about acting as an actor, performing a play and motivate our students to speak up and feeling the urge to participate. And I think that, you know, really hits the nail on the head, doesn't it? There's another lovely comment as well from Anne. What Anne says is it is often that they are concerned. I once had a class that said nothing for 25 minutes when I asked them to speak together, but would answer a question when asked to them directly by me. They were all doing IELTS and perfectly capable of getting band 7.5. And I think this is something that we've all experienced.
That's that culture again of the class. Yeah, how to change that.
Definitely. And Sean, sort of, you know, you were mentioning earlier that that's, you know, sort of at the heart of English File when you were working on that is, you know, how do you get students to talk when you're faced with students who don't want to, unless asked a question directly by the teacher and not wanting to do, you know, badly or wrong in the lesson?
Yeah, well, I wish when I was teaching I'd had Ed's Oracy paper to hand, because I think in relation to Anne's comment, I definitely experienced the same thing as well, where it seemed that students didn't really see the value of speaking to each other. I think particularly if they felt that they were a higher level than their partner, what am I going to learn from speaking to the person? Whereas I can speak to the teacher and that will have value with it. So I think there is something that Oracy gives you is a way of looking at what different kinds of speaking involves and why it is training, it's learning a skill. It's not just spending time opening your mouth and waiting for something to come out. You know, I think it is a way of actually really explaining that, you know, for these 10 minutes, for that kind of student, you know, some students are perfect just to chat away for the 3 hours until the but I think where you do have students who are in that sort of frame of mind, it's often because they can't see the point of doing. I think it's really useful to be able to make that connection between what you're doing in the classroom and real world skills.
Yeah, putting that value on it.
I know, Neil, Sean, that you're involved with the English File series, and as a teacher, I've taught from that book many times. And one of the things that people, I say complain, one of the things they say is that everything's too interesting in English File. It's hard to get through a lesson. And that actually is where we can make use of the strength of a course book. Because if I could give teachers here one piece of advice for bringing more Oracy into their classroom, it would be this. Get your students talking about everything in the book, about the reading texts, about the pronunciation activities. Get them to work together on the use of English activities and then talk about when they would use these sentences in real life. Now, with some course books, that's a dull and dry task, but I think it's credit to you and the English File team, Sean, that that's always going to work in a lesson that uses English File. And the key takeaway is don't save Oracy for the speaking activities and the listening activities. You can get students learning through talk all lesson long, whatever the skills focus of your class might be.
Definitely. And actually that ties in really well to the next question, Ed. So Rifat asked how their students can increase their vocabulary. And I think just that, you know, getting students to talk about the vocabulary that they're faced with and, you know, trying to infer meaning through how it's used and the context it's used in and what they think it might mean. This is an activity which I think lends itself really well to English File as well, having taught from that course myself.
Yeah, the Oracy practitioner would say, if you had students who didn't understand words, you would say, perhaps before saying, look at a dictionary or look it up, you might say, talk to somebody else. See if you can figure it out together. And the process of figuring it out together is this example of of interthinking, of putting your brains together and talking and finding out new things. If you remember my crossword puzzle example from the start, that's exactly how it can work in the language classroom with vocabulary. Very often, you arrive together at understanding of lexis through talking about it. And that doesn't happen if the students are told to be quiet, not to talk, and to check their dictionaries. So again, bring oracy into activities above and beyond speaking and listening is the advice.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I think one question that's coming.
Sorry, Charlotte.
No, sorry, you go, Sean. Follow on.
I was just going to say, I think another thing from the Oracy approach with vocabulary is that importance of preparation time when you are speaking, that you're not going straight to performance. That I think you do have that time to explore something that you're interested in. That's where the vocabulary is going to improve. That vocabulary is going to stick. I think if you are just put on the spot and told to talk about something you like, you'll use the language that you know, and you don't have that chance to sort of take that forward.
Definitely. And I guess vocabulary tasks, so to speak, can provide really lovely scaffolding for what then becomes a speaking activity.
Definitely. You could ask students to select one word from the list that they've had to learn and to talk about why they chose that word. And then you can give students feedback and stuff to think about in terms of what they said. If it's okay with you guys, I'd like to just plant a little flag here and just address one issue that I think people often misunderstand about oracy. And because we're language teachers, we tend to focus a little bit too much on the language aspect of speaking and listening. And one really interesting thing about oracy is that it's not just about language. That's actually only 1/4 of the whole equation. Because as you'll see, if you look at the handout or the focus paper, when we talk about what makes an effective speaker or participant in a spoken interaction effective, it boils down to not only having the words, but also doing something with the physicality of speech. So how you pause, how you modulate, how you take turns, etc. It's also decision-making. So the cognitive aspect of oracy is huge. And we're all doing it now because we're trying to figure out when to pause, who to turn to next, what to say next, right? It goes beyond having a good vocabulary. It's cognitive. And the fourth aspect is emotional, because as I talk to you both, I have to figure out if I'm boring you or not. I have to figure out, how you're feeling right now. Should I say some more about this? Should I change the subject? And in real life situations, when spoken interaction happens effectively, it's because the participants are combining those 4 strands of oracy really well. Not just the linguistic aspects, but the physical, the cognitive, and this 4th really important one, the social and emotional aspect as well. And I don't want to bore you guys talking about this some more, but suffice to say, you'll be able to read all about it if you check the focus paper and the handout that we're going to give you.
Sure. Actually, I think that's really nice mentioning that social and emotional aspect of learning. I often sort of want to know why my students are learning English and what it means to them. That can be really, defining behind their motivation. Anne's put a lovely comment where she's talked about getting to know your students, which I think ties in really nicely with that social emotional element. And she says about finding out their interests as a way to get them engaged. She said, I used to listen to the football to comment with some of the students. That's a really, really lovely, Anne. If you can find common ground that you can talk about, that's a really lovely connection you can have with students. We've had a few questions come through about the kind of logistics setups which allow you to manage oracy skills in the classroom. So what do we do if we have large classes? And Rifat's asked, for example, how can we involve our students in talking in a large class that has 130 students? Now, I've never had 130 students, and that sounds more like an assembly than a language classroom.
Wow. Well, first of all, huge congratulations and admiration to our colleague teaching 130 students.
Yeah.
Very quickly, I would say a couple of things. First of all, expect there to be noise. That's the first thing. And secondly, don't try to listen in to every student. I think that is not the intention of Oracy, to get better through being corrected, but in fact to get better through having the chance to practice and to sometimes to work together with language. So I can only imagine how noisy it is with 130 students talking at once. But the one question I would ask back is, does the colleague have any chance to teach online? Because I think the three of us would all agree that the logistics of teaching a class with a large number of students online is in fact slightly easier than doing it in a face-to-face setting. And if we're thinking about learning through language, learning through talk, then it might even mean that Oracy classes work even better on a live online class than they do in the classroom. So that's another thing that we could think about and discuss.
Yeah. Sean, have you ever experienced a class of 130 students?
I really don't think I can get anywhere near that. I think I probably had,
would you want to, though?
Probably my record.
Yeah. I don't think English File is designed, Sean, for classes of 130 necessarily.
I wouldn't want to give out 130 photocopyable activities.
Yeah, it's a large number. Okay, let's have a look. So we've got a few more questions that have come through. It's really nice to see everyone so engaged. This is a comment here from Remy. They say that giving the student the chance to be the teacher for 15 minutes to explain an idea that they may have taken before to introduce the lesson would be a great way to engage them to a new lesson. They said that this proved to be very successful for their own students. I think that's a really lovely activity to do, and again really taps into that sort of social and emotional aspect that you mentioned earlier, Ed. And then we've had another comment from Christelle Anne that says teaching writing letters now and letting learners read and decipher what the letters say, but letting them read short stories is a different story. Okay, interesting. Yes, I guess it's talking about having this sort of discussion and you know, learning through talking, which is, you know, one of the main things that defines what Oracy skills are all about.
Yeah, exactly. Get better at writing through talking about writing in the class, and perhaps even comparing two pieces of writing with a classmate and coming up with your thoughts about that.
Yeah.
If I could just suggest a few really important words that teachers can try to get involved in their activities in class. 3 really important words for Oracy are because, if, and why. And if we can come up with tasks in which the students are using those phrases the whole time, then what they're doing is they're trying to reach an understanding through discussion. And this is at the heart of what Neil Mercer, who I mentioned earlier, the Oracy expert, what he calls exploratory talk. Something where students aren't arguing with each other. They aren't trying to win a conversation about which is the best food, for example. They're trying to reach an understanding. And so we teach them to use the language of negotiation or mediation. They say, okay, so what if we say this? Okay, if we say that, that's not true because she said that. So a lot of the skills that we build through Oracy feed into the everyday real life skills that we need for reaching decisions, arriving at agreements that we use in our studies and in our jobs and in our relationships. So again, those 3 words, because, if, why, can transform a spoken task into an Oracy task, where students are using all of those 4 strands to try and reach some kind of agreement with each other. And that's, I think, something that we explore on the handout that everyone's going to get, with some lovely examples from English File, showing how we can transform a lesson that begins with expressing an opinion into something which goes off into the direction of reaching an agreement, or having this exploratory discussion in which students have that chance to learn through language, to learn through talk.
Yeah.
Yes. I really like that. I think there's a lot. It's, for me, that reflects one of the things we spent a lot of time on English File doing was trying to find that point of balance between a mechanical speaking task and with something that just overloads the students, but too much pressure on their creativity or their imagination or their sense of humor, whatever it is, and to find that point in the middle where they feel supported, and they feel they can understand what they have to do. They don't have to guess, they don't have to risk doing it completely wrong, but where they have that the freedom to express themselves, genuine ability, freedom to explore and express their own feelings and find out something that they didn't know from their
Yeah.
partner.
Yeah.
I think that's a great point, and I think this brings in the idea of feedback. And I think one thing that we've all experienced as teachers is that when we give students a task to do, especially one which involves speaking and listening, I mean, does it go well the first time that you try something like that? In my experience, it doesn't go well the first time, especially if it's a new kind of task for students. So my idea about giving feedback is to give students the freedom to do it badly the first time, to encourage them to keep their motivation by getting them to try and do it again, and by getting them to self-evaluate, to pick out aspects of their speech. If it's a little monologue or a dialogue, get them to think about what went well in there, in terms of their use of the physical aspects of oracy or the linguistic aspects or whatever it might be. Give us an example. What went well there, and what do you need to work on? So the idea that you were saying, Sean, about helping students to feel less intimidated and a bit more motivated to speak, I think is geared towards not always slapping assessment on what students say, but in giving them oracy tasks which are diagnostic, encouraging them to look at what they've just said, try it again, and try to strategize a way to make it just a little bit better the second time. And that, I think, can transform the levels of motivation that students have towards the kinds of tasks that we have in class, especially if there's no pressure. Just try it again. See if you can do it a bit better next time by trying this technique or this strategy. So we as teachers can also model good oracy aspects through the way we set up tasks, through the way we give feedback, through the way we give instructions. And we need to give our students plenty of opportunities to mess up, to make mistakes, and to come back and try again. And at the end of a period of learning, perhaps we'll see a little bit of improvement at the end of all that. Who knows?
Sure. Okay. We had an interesting question come through from Matt Bishop. He asked, what are your thoughts on the use of L1 to support L2 oracy? Is this a question that you've been asked before, Ed?
Absolutely. And I think it's something which is to be encouraged. First of all, what's interesting is oracy skills are transferable across languages. So you can use the oracy skills you have in your native language in the English classroom, or you can learn oracy skills in the English classroom and then apply them at home when you're talking to your siblings or to your partner. And also, having a language gap in the classroom often brings in a little bit of mediation. And so if you're doing a task where you're trying to reach agreement and there are two languages going on, students are not only exploring what they think and showing that they've been listening, but they're also mediating that gap, which again involves a lot of those key oracy skills. So, of course, it's complicated and difficult if having the L1 also indicates that there are mixed abilities and severely significant mixed abilities in a class. But by and large, I tend to be optimistic and tend to think that having students speaking L1 is to be regulated, of course, but is to be encouraged when it means that it allows them to express ideas and to have their voices heard. And the idea of letting students feel heard in the classroom is the first step to helping them feel valued in the classroom. And if that happens in L1, no problem.
That's a really lovely way to put it. We've had some really lovely comments come through, sort of in response to some of the things that we were talking about earlier. And said about allowing learners to talk about how they feel about a topic or subject instead of talking about what they think, since feelings are easily accepted and easily validated. I think that's, and really lovely way to sort of sum up what we were talking about earlier. And Sean, you're talking a lot about, students just being able to express themselves. And probably in relation to this as well, Sharak said, he said, well said, my students' mental health is the single most important aspect of my classes. That's really lovely to hear, Sharak. Here, Zainab says that most of my students are immigrants, hence there is a language barrier in the classroom. They are shy and reluctant to talk in English. How can I overcome this situation? I mean, when I was teaching, I had students from lots of different L1s within one classroom. So, you know, what became the common language was English. And I think this sort of taps into what we were talking about earlier, you know, how do we motivate our students, and how do we ensure that they can be comfortable just talking, expressing themselves.
It's very interesting, Zainab's comment, because historically the Oracy movement in education began or was inspired by the experience of immigrant families in the UK. And the phenomenon which was noticed, that these students were more likely to be passive in class than others. So it was really important, imperative, in fact, to help students who feel a bit disenfranchised to find their voice. So with Zainab's context, working with students who are themselves immigrants, it becomes massively important to start thinking about social and emotional oracy skills to help students use language, whatever language, in such a way that they begin to feel that they belong in the classroom. And once a student feels that she or he belongs in the class, you'll find that it has a knock-on effect on their willingness to learn the language and take part in the activities of the class. So it's a hugely important factor.
Great, yeah. We've got one last question to end on. This is a really lovely one that's coming from Martin Cummins. He says, my apologies as I'm late to your discussion. Boiled down, top 3 nuggets of advice.
Number 1, let students work together more than you're doing right now. Don't try to listen to what they say, let them work together. Number 2, build up a routine of oracy. Do it every lesson that you have, not for a long time, but for a short time, and let students know that they're working on oracy. Number 3, stop correcting your students' mistakes. They don't get better, believe it or not, through being corrected. They get better through being allowed to find their voice. Those are my 3 pieces of advice. Martin, I hope that's acceptable.
We'll take your silence as a yes, Martin. This has been really nice. Thank you, everybody who's attended today, and thank you for all of your comments in the chat box. It's been really lovely to connect on something that you know, is a relatively new term that's being used in ELT. So if you would like to learn more about oracy skills, we mentioned earlier about the focus paper that's freely available through Oxford University Press, and was written by Ed Dudley, who's been here with us today to talk about it. We've also got, if you click the link below, you can download a practical handout, and this is something that Ed and Sean have contributed towards. So please, check out these resources, and, you know, go off into the world and explore everything else that is available to talk about oracy skills. And Ed mentioned that Nick Mercer is a good name to start with. So we hope you've enjoyed the session today, and we look forward to seeing you at the next Facebook Live session.